Members of an Omaha police organization caught in the middle of a public corruption scandal tried to reinstate the original organization. Remember, former Councilman Vinny Palermo and retired Omaha police officers Richie Gonzalez and Johnny Palermo were charged in the scandal. Investigators said they took advantage of the Latino Police Officers Association and the money coming in from donors and fellow officers. In this Six on Your Side exclusive investigation, Brian Mastery reports on the odd turn that took place days ago at the National Convention in Florida.
In January, months before the indictments, Six on Your Side uncovered how the Omaha Latino Peace Officers Association was hemorrhaging money after the current president and past president, both Omaha police officers, were under investigation by Internal Affairs and the FBI. Before the scandal, 150 police officers had dues withheld from their paychecks, earmarked for the Latino Peace Officers Association. 10 days after the search warrant on the LPOA's president's home, Johnny Palermo, only 8 of those 150 employees continued to pay dues, a $20,000 hit to the organization. Days later, at an emergency meeting in Omaha, it was decided that in the best interest of moving forward, the national office would take over, select a new local board of directors and chapter president. Last week, at the National LPOA Convention in Orlando, Florida, Six on Your Side has learned that retired Omaha Deputy Police Chief Greg Gonzalez and brother to Richie Gonzalez, who was indicted as part of the original scandal, asked the national folks to reinstate the old chapter. It sparked an angry email from the president of the Omaha Police Officers Association to its members saying they can't be a part of any chapter led by former members who have severe trust issues. The current president of the Latino Peace Officers Association in Omaha, Sergeant Kenyo Martinez, tells Six on Your Side that he was surprised by the ask to reinstall the old chapter, that it was news to him. He says they lost plenty of goodwill following the scandal and have been rebuilding trust with the public and police with the current version of the LPOA. At one point, dues paying members dipped to 5. The LPOA has that growing. It's up to 20 now. On Your Side in Omaha, Brian Mastery, 6 News.
Now, Six on Your Side wanted to get a better understanding from Greg Gonzalez on the reasoning behind the request to the National Board, but we didn't hear back. In 2018, he was an elected member of the National Board. The current LPOA president tells Brian that the current stakeholders, from the police chief to mayor and other Omaha police unions, back the current version.